I'd like to thank Kevin Meagher for coming on here today to our podcast. And basically, we all know Kevin from commentating previously on various broadcast outlets over the last couple of years and longer. He also was the SPAD to Shaun Woodward of the Labour government when it used to be in power. And basically, let's just dive straight in. Kev, what on earth? What on earth is the view from over there about over here? So, what's going on in your view in the past? Where we are, and where do you think we're going to end up?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody over here, and I'm sat here in my front room in snowy Sheffield at the moment, in a different Hillsborough. I don't think, as ever, Northern Ireland, what goes on barely registers over here. There's been obviously more chat and a bit more interest in the last few years, given the DUP deal with Theresa May, given the kind of outworkings of Brexit, given the problems obviously with the negotiations and the border and all the rest of it. But of course, the issues here are very poorly appreciated and understood. They don't really have the same bite. They don't have the same kind of retail significance. It's interesting, the language of the last few days, where you've got various ministers talking about teething problems, which is the the kind of explanation for the queues at ports and the lack of traffic actually going across both to Belfast and to Dublin, which has just dropped off enormously. But it's the least worst option, because of course the deal's been done. Boris, the Conservative Party, the British media, very keen just to sort of get past all of this now, get sorted with COVID and rebalance again onto a domestic agenda. So they will keep referring to it as teething problems, and however severe it seems in terms of the kind of sandwich shortage at Marks and Spencer's in Belfast city centre, it's not going to have any great consequences. I think government, they're just not really that interested.
Would you agree with the point is that this is just the start of a lot of big changes that are coming down the line, because we, should I say, where we are here is that we're out of the EU, but we're not out of the EU, and a lot of people here are going to start seeing these big differences between the difference between GB and here, and the difference. There's a lot of things actually we won't get. No, we will get some of them because we're out of the EU. So this is all ahead of us.
It is, no, absolutely. I think we're living in tumultuous times anyway. I mean, you rewind 5 years, even from this point, and we're not. I don't think the term Brexit had actually even been coined at that stage. We certainly weren't living with the consequences or the reality of having left the European Union. So that's only 5 years ago. So it's only a matter of months past that David Cameron very plausibly could have still been Prime Minister from the 2015 general election. David Cameron feels like a figure from about 50 years ago. So an awful lot has changed. It is. I mean, so much has changed in the last 5 years. You roll that forward and say we're living in a kind of period of where there's a lot of dynamism in politics and economics, and a lot's changing. And where will we be in 5 years' time? I think it's very, very hard to read. The consequences of Brexit, I think we're only beginning to get our heads around what that means. We've got the immediate kind of, dare I say, teething problems of the ports and supply chains and all the rest of it. But how does Northern Ireland get on with no structural funding from the European Union? How does it get on when Irish farmers to try and lobby to get anything like the equivalent deal that they've had from the European Union and from a British government that is not that bothered about the agriculture sector in Northern Ireland and keeping people happy there, when it's got public finances that have been completely undermined again by COVID, and has got an awful lot of people knocking on the door, and Boris Johnson has a lot of Northern English Conservative MPs in all kinds of places that the Tories have never been represented before. He's got to keep them happy. So his levelling up agenda is going to suck up any cash that's knocking around. So that I think all comes at the expense of Northern Ireland, which has had a pretty good deal from the European Union over very many years, and if nothing else, that cash is going to run out. But I think we can recognise that this has shook the pillars in terms of the assumptions that we've all got about Northern Ireland and the impacts that it would have with the UK leaving. But at that stage, I woke up the next day never really believing that this was going to happen. Like I suspect most people in British politics, you can look at the polling numbers and you can look back at them and sort of say, actually, this was being lost a long time out from before that referendum took place. But nobody in their heart of hearts believed it. Certainly nobody in Westminster, no one of the political parties. The assumption was a bit like 1975, the cognoscenti would pull together the leaders of the various political parties, the business community, David Beckham, other, and they would all sort of say, look, we're better off where we are, and that argument would cut through, and eventually
the Britannia argument, was it?
Would twist, yeah, and that actually look, everybody sensible is saying don't do this, so eventually everybody would fall into line. That didn't happen, of course, and when you look back and you think, yeah, actually, the alarm bell should have been ringing a lot louder, a lot sooner, because especially given what happened with Brexit is exactly what happened not quite with the result, but the process with the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. The same thing happened again. Project Fear, some people call it. Certainly the political establishment saying, don't do this, stay as we are, better together, etc., etc. And huge numbers of people just do not buy into that anymore. And that was a story of the Scottish referendum, which is so poorly, I think, appreciated and understood. In British politics. It was a profound event. You take an argument that's got kind of support in the high 20s, and by the end of the campaign, it's at 45%. Something
that's
catastrophic has gone wrong with your campaign.
Incredible.
And that's what was happening with Brexit as well. So the cut through of the political establishment and its ability to kind of mobilize and shape opinion has diminished. So I think that's one of the big profound takeaways from Brexit. And then when you roll this forwards and you look again at Scotland, which because of Brexit has got a second opportunity to put the argument back to the Scottish public. We're in a new context, i.e. 63% of us voted to stay in the EU. We're being pulled out because of English vote, and it's going to have a big effect. Again, it becomes very difficult to see how Westminster marshals a campaign that stops that actually happening. And we've got, I think, 15 polls in a row now that show support for independence in the mid-50s.
It's incredible.
So I think
incredible what's happening.
It's an incredible change. And the Labour leader in Scotland, Richard Leonard, was heaved out yesterday. Wasn't making much difference. I think there have been 9 leaders of the Scottish Labour Party since 1999. None of them have made much of a difference. They've all been basically just treading water while the SNP has been assuming a dominant position.
Do you think that they're throwing the towel in with Scotland, in that they're going to give it a bit of a rattle to stop it? But what you just said there about the last number of polls and surveys, when there's quite a lot of people don't, the only polls there is the day of the, if you look at it from a historical point of view, and you made a very good point, which was back in the 70s and 80s, it was sitting around 20-25. I think it was 28% was the highest. And then when the debate started, it shot up to 45. Apparently it went over that. Then we had the campaign, the fear campaign, which we don't know if it tipped it or not. And promises were made, blah, blah, blah. And this was all before the Scots, like ourselves, had actually left the EU. Now the Scots are going, hold on here, lads. What's going on here? This was, that's not part of the package. As you just rightly said, 60% would stay in the EU. So I think that'll be the engine. And then if you look at the last number of surveys, which has been going on in polls, it's way up to the 60s. I mean, that's never happened before.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I think whatever anybody from Westminster says when they kind of clatter into Scottish politics now, it just seems such a discordant note that they strike. I mean, for me, you look back at the way the Thatcher government treated Scotland, and introduced the poll tax there a year before it did in the rest of England.
Absolutely.
and all the rest of it. They're a bit like. There are a lot of these folk memories of the way Scotland has been mistreated in the fairly recent past, and that's built into something that's actually a positive agenda. And I think the thing with the SNP and the Labour Party, I think particularly, completely kind of miscue their attacks on the SNP. The SNP is a social democratic party. It's a party of the centre left, the progressive left, progressive nationalist party, however we want to term it. There's a lot of perfectly nice, decent people there with some nice, decent ideas about free university education, free care for the elderly, and all the rest of it. You can't really argue with that. And they've got some perfectly good, credible people, and I think there's still an assumption that at some level British politics defaults back to its factory settings, and that we get kind of normal politics, of the Labour Party, the Tory Party, the Lib Dems, the SNP in a box, the Nationalists very much at the margin, and all the rest of it.
So basically, just fed up with that now. They're just like,
that just isn't happening. It's just not happening. I mean, the new normal is that actually, Scottish nationalism is parked at the precipice of independence. That's where public opinion seems to be. There's a perfectly rational and reasonable argument that says a country of 5 million people with a great heritage and sustainable industries and all the rest of it, with a very pro-European outlook, can survive perfectly well outside of the UK and the EU. There's no reason why that can't happen. And none of these arguments about maintaining the status quo seem to have any purchase anymore. And Westminster lacks the personalities, I think, to be able to make these arguments. I mean, you look at Blair's first cabinet in 1997, and the late 90s particularly. A third of his cabinet are Scots.
That's right.
Some really formidable politicians. Gordon Brown, a Robin Cook, Donald Dewar. Lots of very, very credible people. And you look at the Labour front bench in the last 10 years. There's hardly a Scot on it. And of course, you look at the 2015 result. There's only one Labour MP in Scotland these days.
Which brings me on nicely to the next question, which is, and we'll move on to another one afterwards, which will follow, is will there be Scottish independence before there is Irish independence, as in a 32 county independent Ireland? Are Scotland going to be there first, or could they be there first, the way things are going?
I mean, it's a fascinating
$64,000 question, isn't it?
It is, and as I say, you roll forward 5 years from where we are now, having looked back 5 years and said so much has changed. So much I think will change again, and I don't see the argument for Scottish independence dropping away anytime soon. And I think if what happens in the Scottish Parliament elections in May, if assuming everything goes ahead as it should, if the SNP perform very, very strongly, and then take that as a mandate for an independent Scotland, there's slight echoes here of Sinn Féin in 1918, I suspect, as well. If the SNP then say, look, Westminster, we want a second referendum, you can't really deny that there's an appetite for that, because if you vote in SNP, ergo you're voting for another referendum. The question then is can Westminster simply say no? And there are people around Boris Johnson, and their view is you just tell her no. You just tell Sturgeon no, you're not having one. That's it. Their move. What happens at that point? Well, what happens at that point potentially is that the issue curdles a little bit. Potentially, the SNP or the Scottish government then calls its own perhaps non-binding referendum, and then we're in kind of Catalonia territory, which is kind of no good for anybody really. But at the end of the day, this thing has got to keep moving. I mean, any kind of validation of the position of the SNP has got to kind of play itself out, to some degree. It's not an end point. It doesn't just quietly go away and govern Scotland for 5 years.
I think the game's up. I think if you feel it, it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, etc. It is going to happen. I think Scotland's people, because I know I had a few of my friends worked on the Scottish referendum who were from here, and they were convinced they were going to win it. Believe it or not, I wasn't too sure, because I just don't think that they were ready yet. And my God, when they did come out with the results, I'm like going, I think it's just going to be, as you say, cliff edge stuff. Brexit's just brought them up to the cliff edge. And I can't believe, once again, it's been handed to them. And that's why you're seeing people go, nah, I'm good. I don't want to go in with this little Englander. We're good, we're cool. We still love you. We still got all our connections and everything's good. But, we also have a history of independence. And which is what we're going to fulfill, which we're going to fulfill now, because the chance and the opportunity is now just sitting there waiting to be grabbed.
And I think there's something very interesting, and it's something that's as applicable to Scottish voters as it would be to people who want a united Ireland, and as it would be, frankly, to Brexiteers ironically, which is that there's something genuinely exciting and invigorating at being at the birth of a nation, and that's how Brexiteers very much would see Brexit.
Yeah, it's a good point.
It's how I think people in Northern Ireland see talk of a new Ireland, a new 30. Let's start again. Let's get a piece of paper and see how this works best. Not
it's exciting though to say that there is an air of excitement.
Exciting. It is. And I think it kind of washes away these kinds of traditional pocketbook issues and the kind of risk aversion that so much of politics is about. It's about trying to say to people, you might want that, but actually, it's a bit dangerous. Don't do that. Which is the Project Fear stuff. And it's not working on huge numbers of people, clearly. And I think what we'll see is the SNP doing very well, and then, as I say, that's got to kind of play itself out. So that in a sense is constitutional fire number one, sometime around May 2021, and then we roll forward to 12 months potentially to the assembly elections in Northern Ireland, and potentially then you ignite constitutional fire number two. So at what point then, with a government in its mid-term malaise, and there are lots of people in the Conservative Party very critical of Boris and what have you, with the public finances under intense pressure and lots of demands for the government's efforts and time and resources pulling in lots of different directions, because so much domestic policy has just obviously gone by the wayside these last 5 years. And then potentially you end up with either a COVID economic backlash or further problems with Brexit. So you end up with a British government in a weak position potentially by 2022 or so anyway. And then you've got these huge constitutional issues which just will not go away. And at what point then do you say, actually, if we can't put all this back in a box, do we just actually give birth to what might be inevitable anyway, which is to have a referendum on Scottish independence, and then depending on the results in Northern Ireland, potentially something there as well. So I mean, my inkling is that Scotland comes to the boil first.
Right. Okay.
Simply because of the sequence of the next 2 years, and I think it's
if Scotland goes, it's that's it. I mean, if Scotland does leave the Union,
Scotland goes, absolutely. I mean, so what is the point of Northern Ireland if there's an independent Scotland? Absolutely. I think.
So that could act as the catalyst, perhaps the catalyst. One of the many options we talked about is that could be the catalyst. Moving back home here, what's happening here at the moment is that the United Ireland debate, or the New Ireland debate, or whatever way you want to call it, is now fully in the mainstream. It's now gone. It's now there. It's happening. It's in the main narrative, and everyone's talking about it, which I've never experienced before, because it is a real thing. It's a live thing, a live issue, and I think it has to go somewhere. And it's got to find a home. The present time, there are many people who are interested in discovering what it is, what it's all about. And in Scotland, they had this 600-page document, which everyone was able to dissect. Over here, it's starting. The Shinners have put out a lot of information out of it, but no one else seems to be really making a big effort, especially the Southern government, who really isn't doing very much.
It's not a short-term issue. It's not a medium-term issue. It's a long-term kind of aspect.
No, we're not interested.
It's two old blokes sat in the back room of a Dublin pub, lilting the dying rebel. It's that kind of thing. It isn't, and I think we're very clear about that. And you're right. I mean, the issue is in the mainstream. People are talking about it. I think that there's a period of the normalization of the concept that something is happening, something is going to change. I mean, the UK. It may precipitate all this, as I say, with Scotland going anyway. We may be talking about the United Kingdom of England and Wales, within a decade, which would have massive ramifications. And the Good Friday Agreement is various things, but it is a blueprint for bringing about the peaceful reunification of Ireland if a majority of people want that. And once that calculation reaches a point, it reaches critical mass, terminal velocity, wherever we want to describe it, where there is a majority that can be assembled within the rubric of the Good Friday Agreement, then it's game on. And at that point, it's not for Dublin should have done a lot of the prep work by that point. It should be seeing in real time where this debate is going.
And Dublin haven't done very much. As a matter of fact, I don't think they've done anything.
And I think, you know, you look back at the Sinn Féin surge and the result there, and the polls since, and the structural difficulties that Micheál Martin and Fianna Fáil appear now to have in terms of their long-term future and all the rest of it, and how some of this plays out. I suspect where we'll arrive at in due course is that everybody in Dublin will have been in favour of a united Ireland all the way along.
Yeah.
And they'll have jumped on the bandwagon right at the 11th hour and all.
Yeah, but we just want to be really sure, and we've
always been in favour of it. You know that.
Of course,
I've said it before.
It's like we know they're going to do it, because that's what politicians do.
It's up to them to. I mean, I think there's a wariness that sort of says, look, don't try and bounce unionist opinion into this by talking about it and looking as though you're pricing in that they're just meekly accepting it. So I think there's some of the diplomacy of that, but by the same token, they need to be alive to the fact that these events may move very quickly. If we ended up in a situation potentially in 2022 where a majority of the parties returned in the assembly in May 2020 were in favour of a border poll, not necessarily United Ireland, but in favour of testing this, because it's now coming to the point. We've been talking about this for a while, and it's not credible for parties like the Greens or Alliance not to have a policy on a border poll. They can be a bit more elliptical about a united Ireland, but to be able to test that, they have an opinion by then. If, for example, they all went into that election campaign committed at least to a border poll, and then you had a plurality of the votes then for parties that were to a border poll.
Absolutely, yeah.
You should have a border poll. At that point. So some of these events may come around very, very quickly. I mean, in any event, it's a bit like, I think they say in chess, they call it zugzwang, when whatever move you make in the dying part of the game, if you're losing, whatever move you make, you will still lose. You can shuffle some of the pieces around for a while and survive, but fundamentally you get weaker with every move that you make.
But make a point there,
I suspect that's where unionism is. That's where it's part of the unionist argument.
My view is perhaps unionism should really have one as soon as possible, and maybe the next 2 years, which is they have a good chance of winning it.
Arlene Foster used to be in favour of this argument.
I remember I said put up stuff on Twitter about we just might have a border poll, and we just be careful what you wish for. I remember her saying that. And there was logic there. And I reckon Arlene Foster, had a point. Robson has a point. But at the moment, they've gone into complete fear mode. DUP are like, no, I mean, it's bad enough what they've done with Brexit and the mess and trying to blame everybody else and their granny and their sleeping dog and their goldfish. The truth of the matter is that they got to own this, and they're going through that right now. And I think the last thing in their mind is to really turn around and say, well, we got to have a border poll as well. That would just completely destroy them. So I think they're in a very difficult place, the DUP, at the moment, when it comes to everything where we are right now.
I mean, it's a good distinction that you make. I mean, the fact is that the DUP leadership, I think particularly under Arlene Foster, has no sense of strategy. It doesn't really know where it's going. I mean, it invested so much in the confidence and supply arrangement with Theresa May. You had Ian Paisley 4 years ago saying, the future's bright, the future's orange, and all the rest of it. And this week he's reduced to looking lovelorn across the chamber of the House of Commons at Michael Gove and saying in a quiet voice, what did we do wrong? What have we done wrong? The objective of the DUP leadership for the last decade should have been about creating space to say, actually, we've got to remove the attractiveness of constitutional change. We've got to try and keep kicking that can down the road. One day we're just not going to have the numbers, and it'll probably happen. But if we can control the medium term, if we can sort of say, look, between the next 5 to 10 years, we're in a pretty strong place, because actually most of the the Catholic nationalist Republican community is bought into things are going pretty well, and the DUP of old and the style and the divisiveness and the rhetoric, all that's cast to one side.
That needs
to go. That's not what's happened. What we've got in the DUP is a kind of is a kind of split between, and I hesitate to use the phrase moderates, but we've got a kind of noisy Paisleyite culture war wing, the Sammies and the Pootses and all these kinds of people.
We've got there are two parties.
Took a rock to the other side, and instead, what we should have seen is and I've made this point to people in the past, even in the DUP, that there was a point here where take Peter Robinson. I mean, Peter Robinson's form throughout the Troubles. Some pretty dramatic stuff there. But Robinson kind of parked all that. And in the period 2007 to 2017 or so, Peter Robinson turned up to work and tried to move the thing forward and work with Martin McGuinness. And it worked pretty well, given where everybody's come from in the very recent past.
I agree.
And I think what Peter Robinson brought to the equation was he didn't need to keep touching base with the DUP base in the way that Arlene Foster has to, because Arlene Foster, has come in from nowhere. She's not got those long, hard years of, in the metaphorical trenches of the Troubles.
Where Peter Robinson, where Peter
Robinson has. So Peter Robinson could, in the same way, of course, it works with Martin McGuinness. Martin McGuinness can make gestures. Big gestures because of who Martin McGuinness is, and nobody can gainsay that. Robinson could do something similar. And I mean, and one of the great losses of the last few years, obviously Martin McGuinness, a huge loss with his death, but in many respects, Peter Robinson's political demise is far more significant than Martin McGuinness's. Sinn Féin has got strength in depth. There's a lot of perfectly credible, perfectly intelligent politicians that can step into the breach. The DUP and unionism suffers from having many fewer people of quality that can do that. So when Robinson goes and Arlene takes over, and you look at Arlene's initial speeches as DUP leader, she's echoing the kind of Theresa May style of, look, I'm a sensible woman. I'll come in here and sort things out and focus on the basics and get those right. And that very clearly got washed out very quickly, because she isn't able to control the space that opens up in front of her. She isn't able to do that. She isn't able to lead unionism in the DUP effectively, because she's got to be very cognizant of some of the grassroots and some of the outriders and all the rest of it. Where's the strategy? There is no strategy. I mean, Robinson kind of enunciated what the strategy had to be or should have been. I think it was in his 2011 DUP conference speech when he's very boldly saying to his delegates, we won't have the numbers in years to come. We won't have the numbers to simply assume that we can run this place or that this place will even exist. So we need to refashion our appeal. We need to create a big centre ground of people who are broadly satisfied with the way things are, and actually marginalise in the nicest way, I guess, that marginalise the appeal of Irish unity. So he sets it out as long ago as a decade ago. And he was absolutely right. From the DUP's perspective, that's got to be the strategy. The strategy has got to be, you've got to make this place work, which means you've got to give a bit as well, which means you've got to show more generosity, which means you've got to challenge your base more, which means you've got to say, this is for the greater good and the long-term future and viability of Northern Ireland. And you've got to keep making that argument to your grassroots and to the people who support you. And that just never happened. And it's never happened in any meaningful way under Arlene Foster. There's nothing she's ever said or done which shows that she believes that or even understands it. But it's a case of saying, well, okay, if you don't want to do that, where else is the strategy? How else are you going to maintain the DUP's preeminence with unionism and also the preeminence of unionism within Northern Ireland? And yes, they've managed to squeeze the UUP, but what's happening with the unionist voters is cannibalizing. It's cannibalizing. That's all. They increase. It comes at the UUP's expense. The overall totality of the unionist vote, and therefore the argument for the status quo, is shrinking. And Arlene Foster is doing nothing whatsoever to prevent that from happening.